Well, good morning, Bamel. It is now time for the sermon. There we go. I got inspired when I heard some churches cheer for the offering. I thought maybe y'all just wanted to cheer for the sermon. I am excited about this sermon because I'm not doing it alone. Leanne is going to be joining me. I'm going to invite her to go ahead and come up here. Leanne is going to help us close out this series where we've been thinking about what it means for us to regroup as we look ahead to 2022. How do we want to do life together as a church? And part of that story is how were we involved in serving one another and serving the neighborhood around us? How can we do that well? And how does that shape us as people, as disciples of Christ who want to take that seriously? And so I want to share with you the story from Matthew 9, which is the classic guilt trip text every preacher would use to get people to do things, right? Let's listen to this story again. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." I think every time I've ever heard this text preached on, usually it sounded something like this. There are all these people out there who don't know Jesus, and why are you just sitting here? You got to get up and start working. Get to work. The harvest is plentiful, and Jesus needs workers. Come on, let's go. But what's interesting about that to me is the problem in this text is not that no one's heard about Jesus, right? The problem, in fact, is the opposite. Too many people have heard about Jesus. There are all these people who have heard about this prophet who can heal what is ailing them, who can speak words of life into their life, who can heal things that no one else has been able to help them with. And so they flock to this man in order to have a chance at a different kind of life. And they come in droves. And what's interesting about that too is these are all people full of need. Deep needs. Needy people. And when Jesus looks out at that, what he sees is not burden, but opportunity. What he sees is life. The fields are ripe with harvest. And I know we are disconnected from kind of farming life. But let me tell you, if you've ever lived in a farming community, especially in this day and age, your livelihood depends on there being a good harvest. And when he looks out, what he sees is life. This is not burden. This is not life draining. All these people coming in their need is a harvest. It's opportunity. And if only we could have the eyes of Christ when we see the need of the world. That's what I want us to explore today. And Leanne, thankful to have this conversation with you because I think you can help us with this. And I want to start there with kind of where your eyes are drawn. What do you see? You've been here a long time. How many years have you been at Bamel?
Gosh, I think it's almost 18.
18.
So
yeah, we were
I started when I was 4.
Right. Put you to work right away.
Yeah.
We were actually having this conversation. We were trying to figure out who had been here the longest, Leanne, Michael, or Gail.
It's Gail.
And it's Gail. Yeah. Gail won that
She
opportunity.
wins.
Yeah, so that's a lot of lived experience in this community. You've seen things change, come and go. And I wonder what you see when you look at Bamel and what's in front of us.
So, right now, we've had a couple of years that have been really difficult. This has been a really difficult season, not just in our church, but in our community, in our world. And I know we're all really tired of hearing phrases like unprecedented times and new normal. But the reality of where we are right now is that church looks different from what it used to. We have different patterns of worshiping. We have different ways of gathering. And what is exciting to me about this time that we're in is that we have tremendous opportunity. Coming out of this season, and I realize we're still in a pandemic, and that's true, but as we start to, like this whole series is about regrouping, as we start to do that and we start to look towards the future, we have the opportunity right now to create the BAML that we want to be moving forward. Because BAML's not just the elders, and it's not just the ministers, but it is you. It is all of us working together to create what we want to be here and what we believe God wants us to be in this community. I'd like to read you briefly the ministries that we have at BAML, and I want you to know that all of these ministries I'm about to read to you are fully functioning. I think it's easy to think that some of our programs and things are still on hold or still in waiting mode, but they're not. All of these are fully functioning. They're open to volunteers. They're doing work. And I'm going to read through these, and I could just hand you a list. And you could read them on your own, because I'm well aware most of you are very literate and could do that. But the reason that I'm reading them to you is because here's what I want you to do. I want you to pay attention to what is happening inside of you as I read these. I want you to pay attention to the one or the two that kind of catch your eye, that you kind of feel a nudge towards. And you don't have to do anything with that. I'm not asking for a commitment. I'm just notice that within yourself. So our assisted living ministry holds worship services at an assisted living facility, and actually they're starting that next week. So they are ready to go. They've got their teams ready. Our audiovisual team runs our audiovisual equipment for worship and events, including live streaming, which has been tremendously important over the past couple of years. Our children's ministry is open to not just people with children to volunteer, but people with no children, people who have grown children. They come alongside our children and our families to support their spiritual growth. CPS Family Needs partners with our local CPS office to provide for the needs of foster, adoptive, and at-risk families in our area. Disaster Relief partners with Houston Responds, and they help us prepare for future disasters so that we can respond quickly when needed. Our donut ministry, we love our donut ministry. They coordinate the purchasing and serving of refreshments on Sundays. Our food pantry, if you're not aware of this, because we haven't really talked about it yet, but they have moved from kind of this building behind the chapel out to the Kaleo building along 1960, which is a fantastic, if you've been here a really long time, you know that as the old teen center. So that's where the teens used to meet. But right now, that's where our food pantry is. And so it's very visible to people along the road. And that's a very exciting thing. So they are growing. Our funeral meal ministry provides a meal for families holding funerals at BAML. Our greeting and hospitality ministry, these are smiling faces that are welcoming people for worship services and special events. You all know them. You all see them. Grief Share provides support for those who have lost a loved one. Harmony Garden builds and maintains our community garden space. Hope Ministry partners with the Hope Center Houston to serve the homeless. Impact Meals serves Sunday lunch at Impact a few times a year, and their first one this year is actually today. Life groups provide opportunities for community and discipleship in a small group format. Local Schools serves the needs of students and faculty at our local public schools. Peacemakers Quilting Group provides lap quilts for members who are homebound or undergoing surgery. So if you like to sew, if you can sew a straight line, I think that's their qualification for joining. So if you can sew a straight line, you can be part of the quilting ministry. Prime Timers provides an opportunity for community for our 55 and older members. Our recovery program is a 12-step program for those who want to stop drinking. This is going really well, David. I'll just go now. Our Spanish ministry, worship and community for our Spanish-speaking members. Our women's ministry creates space for our women to grow in their faith together. World Missions supports mission efforts and missionaries in many different countries around the world. Our worship ministry vocals, also known as our praise team, leads our church in worship through singing. If you want to have as much fun as they were having this morning, every Sunday, that would be a great opportunity for you. Our youth ministry comes alongside our teens and their families to support their spiritual growth. So all of that is a really long answer to your question, David, but I hope what you can see in this is the story of where BAML is right now, and that it's encouraging and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you read all of those because I didn't know all of these either. And there's a lot going on. And lots of places to plug in. We're a very active church. It's just a matter of seeing it. And that's part of what we want to do today is just to bring to our awareness all the stuff that BAML is doing. We are doing so much good already. And how can we capitalize on that and spread that further? I also really appreciate, Leigh, the way you set this up. Not the guilt trip, right? But this invitation to just discern what's going on in you as you listen to that. Because I remember a spiritual formation professor that I had at ACU who said multiple times that anytime you are leading something regarding discipleship, spiritual formation, it always needs to come to others as an invitation, right? Not coercion, not the guilt trip, not trying to, mess with their emotions to get them to do what you want them to do. It's always an invitation that they can either say yes or no to. That's the way healthy spiritual formation happens, right? And that's what we want to do as well. Even as we think about how we want to serve others, we need to receive that as an invitation. And I think that's especially true right now because there are a lot of churches experiencing the same thing, that out of this pandemic, things are working differently. It's harder to find volunteers. There's challenges that weren't there before. And one reaction to that is to get really scared about that and anxious about it. And out of that anxiety, you can try to start manipulating people, right? Start to get them to do what you feel like they need to do in order for this thing to work. And one of the things I have so appreciated about BAML, and it's been a gift to me and our family, but I know others as well, we're not taking that route. The elders here are not taking that route. And I know the ministry staff tries not to take that route too. That's something we're thinking about and paying attention to. That in this moment, that can be so hectic and we can be so anxious about church, we're going to lean into trying to do things healthily. That we're going to try to be spiritually formed in ways that are sustainable and actually life-giving to us. And so that's what you've heard. And that actually takes some hard inner work. And I know that's work you've done. So talk to us a little bit about how do we get there? How do we set up those boundaries where we're not pulled in to things we probably ought not to be doing?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my own journey in that. Several years ago, I can't remember how long ago this was, I used to believe that being involved in church work was how I showed my faith, not just to the people in the church, but to God. And like that was the way that I showed my faith in God. And so what that meant was when people asked me to do something, if I had any ability to do that at all, I felt like I had to say yes to that. And a lot of them I wanted to say yes to, and a lot of them, they were good things. But what happened over time, I'm sure none of you have ever had this experience, but I found myself overcommitted, overworked. I had no concept of rest at all. And I knew something had to change because this wasn't healthy. This wasn't a good balance. And so what I decided to do, and this just came from an idea I had, I needed to practice saying no. And so I decided that for a period of time, I would say no to everything. There were a few things, obviously I had responsibilities that I had to do, but everything else that I had a choice in, everything someone asked me to do, I said no. And that was really hard initially, and over time, what I found was that allowed me to create space in my life for the presence of God. It allowed me to create space to be able to start discerning what are good things to do, and then what is mine to do? How am I made? It gave me time to start thinking about myself and the way that God had made me, and kind of just start to sift through all of that. And that lasted about a year. I didn't have a time limit on it, but it lasted about a year. And I could feel when it was time for me to start stepping into things. But what happened in me during that time was that when I did start stepping into things again, it was from a much healthier place. And I knew, I don't think we ever fully get there, but I had a better handle on how to discern, is this something that's mine to do, or is this something that would be a good thing for someone to do? And those are not always the same thing.
Yeah. My therapist gave me a book to read one time. Y'all know the book, The Giving Tree? This young boy keeps asking for things from this tree, and the tree keeps giving and giving and giving until it's left with nothing but just a stump, right? And my therapist goes, that's horrible. Like, this tree needs some boundaries. And so there's this other book that's written as if like, okay, here's what the tree should have done. He should have said no, so the tree could survive and enjoy the relationship with this boy instead. So there's this alternate version of The Giving Tree you should check out at some point. But that's so hard for us to lean into, because it feels like there are so many good things to do. In fact, I have heard young preachers described as quivering masses of availability, right? Because you come out of school, seminary, and you want to help somebody. You just want to help somebody. And it takes some time to learn the ways in which that affects your own soul. And you need to carve out time and space for your own spiritual well-being and your own family. You have to start saying no, even though that can be really hard sometimes. And it's ironic to me that this passage that we started with, Matthew 9, has so often been used as this way to get people to do more, when it's a story about Jesus setting a boundary. Right? What does he say? He's looking out at all these people. He has compassion on them. He sees their need, and he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The translation of that is, I can't do all of this. I need help. I need people to come alongside me. And then, you know what happens right after this, the very next story? It's the calling of the 12 disciples. It is Jesus confessing his own human limitations that leads to him reaching out and tapping the shoulder of these 12 disciples to join him in the work of welcoming the kingdom of God. There is this really important part of the end of Matthew 9, though. Did you notice he doesn't immediately call them to go do something? The invitation is to pray. I can't do all of this. The harvests are plentiful. The workers are few. Would you pray? Let's pray that our God would send workers into the harvest field. And I think spiritually healthy service in the kingdom requires that starting point. You see the need, but the first step is prayer. And not just prayer, but the kind of deep, searching prayer that Jesus himself does and discovers his own calling and mission. You think about Luke 4, when Jesus goes to the synagogue and he declares, he reads from Isaiah and he tells them, these words that I've just read are now coming to fruition. I'm the guy. Here's what he says. This is what he reads from Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. This is Jesus' mission statement. This is his core identity. This is Jesus' calling. What is the work Jesus is about? It's this. And what's unique about this, or what we should pay attention to, is the fact that he articulates this on the other side of his experience in the desert. He's been in the desert praying and fasting for 40 days, and he's confronted with darkness. He's confronted with evil. Satan comes to him 3 times, and the 3 offers that he gets, these temptations that he gets, are this kind of misaligned versions of his calling. You could be great, Jesus. You could be in the history books just alongside Napoleon and Alexander the Great. You could be one of the greats, rule the empire. You have that in you, Jesus. You could do that, Satan says. Or you could use your power for your own good? Would you turn this rock to bread so that you have something to eat? You just use it selfishly. Or maybe you just want attention. You want all eyes to be on you, and so you jump off and you impress everyone with how saintly and spiritual you are because you are so good that God would not let any harm come to you. Jump off the top of the temple and let everyone watch. Those are all bastardized versions of Jesus' calling. And Jesus rejects all of that and receives and lives into this calling out of Isaiah. That what have I come to do? Oh, I've come to proclaim good news to those who need to hear it. And that only comes out of a life lived in prayer, that deep searching kind of prayer. And that's where we want our ministry to flow out of too. I love this quote from Howard Thurman. Those of you who may not be aware of Howard Thurman, he is often called the father of the civil rights movement because of the spiritual center of that activism. And it's easy to see why when you think about him saying this. He became this spiritual center for a lot of people whose lives were dedicated to making the world better. This is what he says. In the inward sea, there is an island that everyone has in their spirit. And on that island is an altar. And next to that altar is an angel with a flaming sword. In order to put what is most important on the altar, you first have to find the sea. You have to get to the island, and you have to get past the angel so that you can find what is most genuine in you and what is most important. Once you find that, you come alive. I love that. Because what is an altar for? It's for sacrifice. And as we lean into making a sacrifice of our own lives, that is a much harder task than we often imagine, because so often we get distracted with these false selves that we think are true sacrifices, but really it's just kind of a self-serving narcissism that's disguised. And so Howard Thurman says, no, you got to lean in, you got to fight this inner battle. Pay attention to your inner self so that your ministry and service comes from a true spiritual center. I love that vision. So Leanne, what's the first step in this? Like, how do you, because I know you've done this inner work. What if someone wanted to do that in order for their ministry to kind of flow out of that place? What might their first step be?
Yeah, I think, so I love all of the things that you're saying. I love the quote, and I think it can be easy for us to hear things like this that are very big and very spiritual and not really know how to do that, like how to start with that. And the first thing I think I would say is that there is not a formula for this. I wish there were, because it would make this conversation a lot easier, but it would also make it a lot easier for all of us to how do we figure out God's calling on our lives. And we could just do step 1, step 2, step 3. But I can't give you that because there isn't one. There's not really a do this first and then do this, but it's all happening at the same time. So as you're stepping into service, you're spending time reflecting on that and how does my relationship with God fit into that? How's my faith growing through that, and constantly taking inventory. And it's kind of a both and all of this at the same time process. But I will say this, if you're not really sure where to go from where you are, there's a great quote by Frederick Buechner, and it says this: "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." I love that quote. And another way to think of this is, where do your joy and the world's need intersect? I think we can say that there are a couple things that are true. We know that the world is hungry. We are not blind to that. We know that the world is hungry. We know that there is deep need in our world physical, emotional, spiritual. People are hungry for love and support and belonging on top of very felt, tangible needs. We know the world is hungry. We also know that each of us is gifted in unique ways for the purpose of blessing other people. And when I say gifted, when I talk about giftedness, I think a lot of times we think skills, abilities, things that we're good at, and it's easy to feel like that doesn't apply to me. That might be hard for you to think about the things that you're good at. But that's not what I'm talking about when I say giftedness. You move through the world in a very specific way because of who you are and how you're made. You see people that others don't see. And you are drawn to things that other people pass on by. They don't notice them. But you notice them because of the way that you are created. And that's what I mean when I say giftedness. We all have that in us. If it helps, this is not in my notes. If it helps, if you were raised in church, or if you have heard about people who are raised in church, you can think of this like a potluck. All of us, when we gather together, are bringing something. And what you bring makes it better. A potluck is not a very good potluck if everybody brings the same thing, or if only 3 things are on the table. It's a potluck when there are hundreds of different, and you know what? I'm not bringing green bean casserole because I don't like green bean casserole, but also because mine is not very good. But one of you will bring it and everybody will love it. I'm going to bring desserts because my desserts are excellent. Some of you can't cook at all. And you get to bring napkins because we are going to need napkins. Okay? So I went off script. Anyway, but take some time to dig into all of that within yourself. Figure out what gives you joy. These are great questions to ask. What gives me joy? What makes me fulfilled? At the end of a long day, what makes that a good day for me? What needs around me make my heart just ache and say, this is not how the world should be? And as you listen to that list of ministries at the beginning, which ones pull at your heart a little bit? And all of those are great questions to start asking to figure out how you are created to serve in this place. I have a mentor who says this phrase often, and it's become really meaningful to me. She says, the best gift you can give to the people around you is the person you are becoming. It's not what you're doing. I want you to sign up to volunteer. That is my job. But that's not first priority. I would rather have 100 people doing one thing each than to have 5 people doing 20 things each. It's about who you're becoming. So I want to really encourage you to create space for God in your life, to work through you because he's working in you, and allow that Spirit to transform you so that it can flow out of you and serve others from that place.
So, okay, if we're listening to this and we're feeling that conviction, a sense of calling, we've done some of that inner work, what are some of the next steps for how we get involved here at Bamel?
Yeah. So in terms of self-discovery, not all of us grew up being taught this or knowing how to do it. Prayer and reflection, like David talked about earlier, such an important place to start for all of this. Talk to trusted friends and people who know you, and find out what it is about you that makes you a good friend. What do they think you are gifted in? Because it's hard sometimes to look at ourselves and know those things, but asking people who know us well is a great place to start with that. Utilize tools, personality tests, things like the Enneagram. Some of these are like buzzwords right now, and they're not going to tell you everything about yourself. That's not really the goal, but it is a great starting place if you are not really sure how to orient yourself. Process all of this with a counselor or a spiritual advisor or a mentor along the way. Get some feedback from somebody as you're going through this process. And then just remember that this is a journey. This is a lifelong process. You're not going to have an overnight epiphany. And if you do, excellent, but you'll have more work to do the next day. It's not over. So first steps in finding a place to serve here. Start small. Do not jump into leading a whole ministry here if at the moment you're not doing very much. Start small. Sign up for an email list. Talk to a ministry leader. Indicate some kind of interest. We have ministry interest forms out at the Welcome Center this morning. They look like this. They have kind of a teal and yellow stripe on them. You can fill that out this morning, and all it is just a series of check boxes. And if whichever ones you felt drawn to at the beginning when I read that list, just check that. This isn't a commitment for anything. This isn't committing you to signing up for the next 6 months. This is just saying, I'd be interested in a conversation about this, and I just want to find out some more. So that is a fantastic, small first step to take. And then one of my favorites is set limits. We don't talk about this a whole lot, but if you're stepping into something new, decide that like a period of time that you're going to do it for. Say, I'm going to try this for 3 months, or I'm going to try this for 6 months, or I'm going to volunteer 2 times, and then I'm going to reevaluate. And that's my plan. And you're not committed to doing that the entire time that you are here at BAML. But for that period of time, that's what I'm going to do, and then I can decide if that's for me or if that's not for me right now. And then communicate. Be honest with the ministry leader. Have a conversation with them and say, hey, this is where I'm at. I don't know if this ministry is for me, but I'd really like to explore it a little bit. And, or you may be ready to go. You may know. Out of that whole list, you may know the one that you are ready to start. And tell them that too, because they'll be good at helping you find a good place for you within that ministry. Some resources that we have. Our website, baml.org/serve, has all of this on it. It's got this ministry interest form that you can fill out electronically. It also has a list of current needs. So our current volunteer positions that we are in need of are listed on that page. Some of you are the kind of people that like to respond to a specific need. So if that's you, this page is excellent for you. Look through those and see what might match your interests. And then my contact information, serve@baml.org. You also can use my leannes@baml.org, but there are 100 ways to spell Leanne, and so sometimes it's easier to remember. Serve@baml.org also goes directly to me, and then you can always reach me by calling the office number.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. Well, as we wrap up, let me just say thank you. How many ministries are listed?
Like 80.
Yeah, I felt
A lot.
There's a lot, and that's because of you, right? BAML has been so active in this community and serving one another, and it is we are because of that service. Yeah. And so there is always the desire to keep going and imagining what might be ahead and finding new ways and transitions. But I also don't want to overpass the fact that good work has already been done and is being done already. And so thank you for that. Leanne, would you mind closing us out in prayer?
Sure. Lord, I thank you for the gift of your Spirit, and I thank you for this community of faith, this church that is overflowing with generosity and love. I ask that you will make your presence known in each of our lives, and that we will be transformed by your Spirit within us. Help us to love one another and to love our neighbor well, as you've called us to do. Go with us this week as we walk in faith. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.